I don't remember the last time I saw sunlight. I don't remember the last time someone said my name without it sounding like a curse. What I do remember, every single day, is the cold of the floor, the weight of the chain around my ankle, and the sound of footsteps coming down the stairs that always meant something was about to be taken from me again. My name is Kylan, and for 3 years nobody cared. This channel is built for people who feel everything deeply, so subscribe and stay, and like this video so the next broken soul searching for a story like this one can find their way here too. And now, I tell my story. The chain was old. It had rusted in some places, and the rust had gotten into the skin around my ankle so bad that I stopped feeling it after a while. That was probably the scariest part. Not the pain, but how fast a person stops feeling things they should never have gotten used to. The basement of the walking stronghold smelled like mold and something older than mold. Something that had no name. They never gave me a window. They gave me one blanket in winter and took it back in spring like it was a privilege I'd borrowed. The light, what little there was, came from a single bulb that flickered so often I started timing it. 11 seconds on. 4 seconds off. Sometimes 12 seconds. Sometimes the darkness lasted longer and I would just sit there, knees to my chest, and count my own heartbeat instead. I was 21 years old and I had been here since I was 18. Before that, I'd been passed from one house to another, an orphan with a strange gift nobody could explain and everyone wanted to control. They called me the last bound Omega. I didn't know what that meant for a long time. I learned what it meant the hard way. My gift, and I say that word with every piece of bitterness I have left in me, was simple. If someone was sick, truly sick, all they had to do was bring me close enough and I would feel it. The sickness would move. Like water finding a crack, it would slide from their body into mine, and then my own body would fight it, burn it, dissolve it in a few hours, and I'd be left shaking and hollow on the floor while they walked away clean and healed. The walking alphas figured this out when their leader, a man named Armando, got a fever that wouldn't break. One of his men dragged me upstairs, held my hands to Armando's face, and watched it happen. Armando's fever was gone in minutes. I spent 2 days after that on the floor of this very basement, shaking so hard my teeth bled from clenching. After that, I became their medicine cabinet. Armando never came himself. He always sent the guards. They never explained what was happening. They just brought whoever was sick, shoved them close, and waited. Sometimes it was a cold. Sometimes it was something worse. Broken bones that had gone infected, chest illness, something dark and spreading that I couldn't name but could feel the moment it entered me like swallowing fire. My body always fought it. Somehow, my body always won. But winning was costing me. I couldn't walk anymore. Not properly. My legs had stopped being mine somewhere in the second year. They would buckle, go numb, refuse to hold me even when I tried. I stopped trying after a while. I stopped talking too because there was no one to talk to, and then one day I opened my mouth to say something to myself. Just to hear a voice, even my own, and nothing came out. Just air. Just silence. My voice was gone. I didn't cry about it. I think I had run out of tears somewhere around month 4 of year 2. What I did instead was press my back against the cold wall, watch the bulb flicker, 11 seconds, 4 seconds, 11, and wait. For what? I didn't know. I had stopped knowing what I was waiting for. But something in my chest, some stubborn, stupid, embarrassing little thing, kept beating anyway. And then the wall broke. Not metaphorically, literally. There was a sound from above, shouting, then something heavy falling, then running feet, and I curled tighter against the wall because that was what I always did when things got loud. Make yourself small. Make yourself invisible. Maybe they won't come for you today. But the footsteps came down the stairs. 3 sets of them. Heavy, fast, nothing like the dragging shuffle of the guards. The door flew open. 3 of them stood there, 3 boys, maybe a year or 2 older than me, all looking like they'd run through a wall to get here, which, looking at the dust on their shoulders, they probably had. They were breathing hard. The tallest one had a cut on his jaw. The one beside him had his shirt torn at the shoulder. The third one, the one slightly ahead of the others, went completely still when he saw me. I pressed harder against the wall. "There's someone in here," the third one said. His voice was low, rough, like he hadn't expected to find anything alive down here. "I see him," the tallest one said, quieter now. None of them moved for a second. They just looked at me. At the chain on my ankle, at my legs that were too thin and bent wrong against the floor, at my face that was probably as pale as the wall behind me. I stared back. My mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Hey," the third one said, and he crouched down so he wasn't towering over me anymore. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and he looked at me like he was trying very hard not to look alarmed. "Hey, we're not with them, okay? We're not going to hurt you." I didn't believe him. Of course I didn't believe him. Every person who had ever walked down those stairs had said something similar and then done the opposite. But then the tallest one, the one with the cut on his jaw, sat down on the stairs like he had no intention of rushing me. And the one with the torn shirt just leaned against the doorframe and looked away, like he was giving me space on purpose. That was strange. Nobody had ever tried to give me space before. "Can you tell me your name?" the crouching one asked. I opened my mouth. Nothing. His jaw tightened. Not in frustration, not in the way Armando's men tightened theirs when I wasn't cooperating, but in something that looked more like pain. Like finding me here hurt him personally. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay, that's fine. You don't have to." "The chain," the one on the stairs said to the others, not to me. "We need to get the chain off him first." "I know," the crouching one said. "I know. But we can't just rush at him, Wilson. Look at him." So the one on the stairs was Wilson. I filed that away without meaning to. "I'm not rushing," Wilson said. And he stood up slowly from the stairs, hands visible, palms out. "See? Not rushing. Just, do you know if there's a key anywhere?" I shook my head. All three of them looked at the chain. "We'll break it," the one at the door said, pushing off the door frame. "Ronald, break it." The crouching one, Ronald, looked back at me first. "Is that okay? We're gonna get the chain off. That's all." I stared at him for a long moment. Then I nodded. Just once, barely. Ronald moved carefully. He touched the chain like it was something that had done something wrong, not like it was just a piece of metal. He worked at the lock while Wilson held a small light, and the third one, I didn't have a name for him yet, stood by the door and kept watching the stairs. "Got it," Ronald said quietly. The chain fell away. I looked at my ankle. The rust marks were deep, red-brown against my skin. I reached down and touched the place where the chain had been, and my hand was shaking so badly that I pulled it back. "We need to get him out of here," the one at the door said. "He can't walk," Wilson said. It wasn't mean. It was just fact. He'd seen it the same way I had, the way my legs were. "Then we carry him," Ronald said simply. Nobody asked me if that was okay this time. But Ronald looked at me anyway, like a question. I nodded again. And that was how I left the basement for the first time in 3 years. Carried up a set of broken stairs by a stranger who kept saying, "I've got you. I've got you," under his breath like a promise, while 2 others cleared the way ahead of us. I don't know why I believed them. I still don't know. Maybe I just had nothing left to lose. Maybe that stubborn little thing in my chest decided it was tired of just surviving and wanted to try something else for once. The light at the top of the stairs hit my face and I flinched so hard Ronald almost dropped me. "Sorry," he said fast. "Sorry. Cover your eyes, go slow." I buried my face in his shoulder. The light was everywhere. It felt like being stabbed. And also, somehow, like something I had forgotten I'd been missing. Outside, I could hear the sounds of the walking stronghold in chaos. People shouting, doors slamming, the dull thuds of a fight happening somewhere else. "The others are handling Armando's men," the third one said. "We have maybe 10 minutes. Then let's move," Wilson said. Ronald held me tighter and ran. They had a house. Not a stronghold, not a fortress with guards and locked doors. Just a house, big and a little messy, with shoes scattered by the front door and a kitchen that smelled like someone had burned something recently and hadn't figured out what. They put me on a couch. Not a cot in a corner. A couch with cushions, and Ronald grabbed a blanket from somewhere and put it over my legs before he'd even taken his own jacket off. I sat there and looked around like I was trying to memorize everything in case it disappeared. The one whose name I still didn't know came back from somewhere with a glass of water and held it out to me. He was the quietest of the three, dark-haired, with sharp eyes that softened when they landed on me, which was a strange combination. "Here," he said. That was it. Just here. I took it with both hands because one hand alone would have shaken it right out. "His ankle needs to be cleaned," Wilson said from behind the couch, looking over my shoulder. "And we should get a doctor. Not the pack one, someone neutral. Already sent for Nurse Bela," Ronald said, appearing from around the corner with a first aid kit that looked like it had been through several emergencies already. "She'll be here in 20. "Who is she?" I wanted to ask. Couldn't. My voice just wasn't there, like a door with nothing behind it. The quiet one sat on the coffee table across from me. Not too close. He watched me drink the water. "I'm Keegan," he said when I looked at him. "The loud one by the window is Wilson. The one with the first aid kit is Ronald. We're brothers." He paused. "Triplets, actually." I looked between them properly for the first time. The same jaw, the same way of carrying their shoulders, the same hands now that I was looking long-fingered, broad. But everything else was different. Wilson's energy was restless, too much of it, like he had thoughts he couldn't slow down. Ronald was careful, deliberate, every movement chosen. Keegan was still in a way the other two weren't, like he'd decided a long time ago that stillness was worth something. They were alphas. I could tell that the way I could always tell, something old in my blood that recognized the difference without needing to be taught. But none of them had done anything alpha-like since they'd found me. No commands. No reaching without asking. Just space and water and a blanket. It made me more nervous than anything else would have. "You don't have to figure us out right now," Ronald said, sitting on the other end of the couch, leaving a full cushion of space between us. He was looking at my hands, probably because they'd finally stopped shaking and he'd noticed. "You don't have to figure out anything. Just be here for a minute. Be here." I hadn't been anywhere for 3 years. I'd just been waiting. Nurse Bela arrived in 18 minutes, not 20, and she was a small, round woman with silver hair and the kind of no-nonsense energy that made Wilson stand up straighter without her saying a word. She looked at my ankle, at my legs, at my face, and didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Get me warm water, clean cloths, and whoever is hovering needs to back up at least 3 steps. All 3 of them backed up exactly 3 steps. Together, like they'd been one person for so long that moving together was just automatic. Something cracked open in my chest. Very quietly, Bela worked on my ankle without making it dramatic. She cleaned it, dressed it, wrapped it. She pressed gently on my legs to check sensation, and I felt some of it. Not all, but patches here and there. She didn't tell me it was fine. She said, "There's damage here that's going to take time, but it's not permanent. Do you understand what I'm saying?" I nodded. "Good," she said. "I'll leave instructions. Someone needs to do the exercises with him every day, yes? Every day, no skipping." "Understood," Ronald said. "And his voice?" Wilson asked, from his 3-step distance. Bela looked at my throat. She asked me to try just a sound, anything. I tried. Nothing came. "Trauma response," she said, not unkindly. "His body has been under so much stress for so long that it shut this down to protect him. It'll come back. Could be days, could be longer. Don't pressure him. Don't make him perform trying." She looked at the 3 of them in a way that was not a suggestion. "Don't make him feel broken." "We won't," Keegan said. He said it so simply, like it was the easiest promise he'd ever made. Bela left. The house went quiet again. I was still on the couch. The blanket was still on my legs. The glass was empty in my hands. Ronald took the glass gently. "Hungry?" he asked. I had no idea. I had been fed the bare minimum for 3 years, enough to keep the gift working, not enough for anything else. My body had stopped telling me when it was hungry because there was no point. But I looked at Ronald and then, slowly, I nodded. What followed was possibly the strangest 40 minutes of my life up to that point. Wilson, it turned out, could not cook. This became clear very fast, and Keegan had to physically remove him from the kitchen after the second near incident. Ronald could cook, but only simple things, and he kept looking up from the stove to check on me on the couch, which meant the eggs took twice as long as they should have. Keegan sat on the floor near the coffee table. Not on the table, not looming over me, just on the floor, at a level that made him shorter than me for once, and he pulled out a notebook and a pen and slid them across the floor toward me. "In case you want to say something," he said. Then he looked away, like he'd already forgotten he'd done it. I stared at the notebook. Then I picked it up. My handwriting was terrible. My hand was still weak. But I wrote, "Why did you come to that place?" Keegan read it. He was quiet for a moment. "We were tracking Armando for something else entirely," he said. "We didn't know you were there. Finding you was..." He stopped. "It wasn't what we planned." I wrote, "What were you tracking him for?" "He took something from us," Keegan said. "Our wolfless status. Most people think it's a weakness. Armando used to be one of those people. He tried to make an example of us about 2 years back. We've been working towards stopping him since." He looked at the notebook. "He was doing something that was going to hurt a lot of people who couldn't fight back." I wrote, "You're wolfless." "Yes." I wrote, "But you're alphas." The corner of his mouth moved. "Yeah, life's funny like that." I almost smiled. It surprised me so much that I pressed my fingers to my own lips to check if it had actually happened. Keegan saw. He looked back at the notebook quickly, like he was trying to give me privacy for something small and private. Ronald came out of the kitchen with a plate and set it on the coffee table in front of me. Scrambled eggs, toast, and something that looked like fruit that Wilson had probably cut because the pieces were aggressively uneven. "Eat slow," Ronald said. "Your stomach's probably not used to..." He stopped himself. "Just eat slow." I ate slow, and for the first time in 3 years, the food was warm. The first week was the strangest thing I had ever lived through, and I had lived through a lot of strange things. The house had a room for me, an actual room with a door that locked from the inside, which Wilson pointed out approximately 3 times until Ronald told him to stop pointing it out before he made it weird. The room had a window. Real light came through it in the mornings, and I would just lie there in it for a while, letting my face absorb it like something that had forgotten what the sun was, which was exactly what I was. Keegan started the exercises with my legs every morning. He would come in, always knocked first, always waited, and sit at the foot of the bed with Bella's instruction sheet and work through each one systematically. He never made it feel like a chore. He never made me feel like I was something to be fixed. He just did it calmly and consistently, like it was as natural as breathing. My legs were getting better. Slowly, but better. My voice wasn't back yet. I had the notebook everywhere. It became my shadow, this battered thing. Keegan had gotten me a better one after the first day, with actual lined pages, and I had filled almost half of it by the end of the first week. Questions, mostly. Sometimes observations. Once, in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep, I wrote a list of every flavor I remembered liking before the basement, which turned out to be mostly fruits and one very specific type of bread that Ronald somehow tracked down by day 4. He didn't make a big thing out of it. He just put it on the table at breakfast one morning and said, "Found this, thought you might want to try," and went back to what he was doing. I ate the whole thing. I felt something embarrassingly close to joy about it and immediately felt ridiculous for feeling ridiculous about bread. Wilson was the hardest one to be around, not because he was bad, he was genuinely the opposite of bad, but because he had so much energy and so much warmth that it sometimes felt like standing too close to a fire after being cold for so long. You want it, and it also makes you flinch. He learned to dial it back. I didn't ask him to. I think he just figured it out on his own, watched me enough to understand, and started doing things like knocking extra softly and sitting farther away and never speaking above a certain volume in my direction. That probably mattered more than he knew. Drop a like on this video right now because Wilson just did something most real people never learn to do. And subscribe so you're always first here when we drop stories that remind you what genuine care actually looks like. But then there was the thing that none of them had brought up yet. The thing that was sitting in the corner of every room we shared, getting heavier the longer we didn't talk about it. Armando knew we were gone, and he was going to come looking. I knew this because I knew Armando. I had been his most valuable resource for 3 years. He wasn't going to let that go. He wasn't the type of person who let anything go. I wrote it in the notebook and slid it across the dinner table on day 8. He's going to come for me. The three of them looked at it, then at each other. We know, Ronald said. I wrote, and we're not going to let him, Wilson said, like it was obvious. Like the answer to that had never been in question. I stared at him for a long moment. Then I wrote, you don't know what he's like. We have some idea, Keegan said carefully. I wrote, he's been having me absorb illness for 3 years. Whatever he contracts, whatever his men catch, they bring it to me. It gets worse the bigger the sickness is. Once I was down for 6 days after taking in something from one of his men that I still don't have a name for. The table went very quiet. Wilson's jaw was doing something complicated. Ronald had his hands flat on the table, which I was starting to understand meant he was trying very hard not to react visibly. Keegan was looking at the words I'd written like he was committing them to memory. No one is doing that to you again, Ronald said. His voice was steady, but underneath it was something that wasn't steady at all. That's never going to happen again. Not while we're here. I wrote, you can't promise that. Watch us, Wilson said, and it didn't sound like bravado. It sounded like a fact he was simply waiting for the world to catch up to. I didn't know what to do with that. I looked at the notebook. Then I closed it and put it in my lap and just sat with the feeling for a minute. This terrifying, unfamiliar feeling that someone might actually mean it. I was wrong to trust it. I knew that even then. Something in the back of my mind, the part that had learned every lesson the hard way, was already whispering be careful, nothing lasts, nothing is free. But the other part, the stubborn stupid thing, was already halfway gone. The person who first betrayed us wasn't who I expected. There was a fourth person in their world that I hadn't met yet. A man named Jameer who was their oldest ally. Someone who had helped them build their strategy against Armando from the beginning. He came to the house on day 11, and when he walked through the door, he stopped and looked at me in a way that made my skin feel wrong. So this is him, Jameer said. Not to me. Over my head to Ronald. Kylan, Ronald said. His name is Kylan. Jameer smiled. It didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. The last bound Omega. Incredible. Do you have any idea what he could do for? Jameer. Keegan's voice was so quiet it was almost nothing. But Jameer stopped talking immediately. Don't finish that sentence. Jameer finished a different sentence instead, about strategy and positioning, and the conversation moved on. But I watched him the whole time, and I wrote in the notebook later, in the middle of the night, there's something wrong with that man. Keegan found the note in the morning. He read it. He didn't say I was wrong. He said, keep that feeling. Trust it. What none of us knew yet was that Jameer had already sent word to Armando 3 days before he ever walked through the door. He had never been their ally. He had been a spy for longer than any of them had known him. And what he told Armando was not just that they had me. It was where we were, the layout of the house, the schedule of who slept when, and the 1 hour of the day when all 3 of them were usually occupied enough that getting to me would be possible. We found this out later. Too late for some things. Just in time for others. On day 15, I took my first steps alone. They were bad steps. Shaky, lurching things, more like falling forward and catching myself repeatedly than actual walking. But I made it from the bed to the window 4 steps, maybe 5, before I had to grab the windowsill. My legs were burning. My whole body was burning. And Ronald, who had been sitting in the chair by the door doing something on paper, looked up and then very carefully looked back down like he hadn't seen it, because he understood somehow that I needed to do this without an audience. But when I made it to the window and stood there, breathing hard, he said without looking up, "Good job." 2 words. I stood at the window for another minute just absorbing them. My voice came back on day 17. It happened in the middle of the night, which felt right, private, unplanned. I was half asleep and something from a dream was still in my throat and I made a sound. A small cracked nothing of a sound, and my eyes flew open. I said hello to the dark room. My voice was barely there, rough and strange shaped, like something that had forgotten its own form. But it was there. I sat up. I thought for a long time. Then I knocked on the wall, our system, mine and Keegan's, since his room was on the other side. Twice, which meant I need something. He was at my door in 30 seconds. He looked at me. "Hi," I said. Came out like a broken thing. But it came out. Keegan stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he sat down on the floor right there in the hall, back against the doorframe like his legs had given out too. "Hey," he said back. And his voice, his calm, still voice, was not entirely steady. We sat like that for a while. Him in the doorway, me on the bed. Not saying much. Just being there together in the dark. When Ronald and Wilson found out in the morning, Wilson grabbed me by both shoulders and then immediately let go and stepped back and apologized 4 times in a row for grabbing me without asking. I looked at his guilty, earnest face and said, "It's okay." And it was the first time I'd said it to someone and meant it in 3 years. Wilson looked like he might actually fall apart right there in the kitchen. "Okay," he said. "Okay. Good. Great." And then he turned around and made a very unnecessary amount of noise with the pots. Ronald just looked at me. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "Your voice sounds exactly like I thought it would." I frowned. "What did you think it would sound like?" "Like someone who had a lot to say and was waiting for the right time," he said simply, and went back to reading. I stood there in the kitchen doorway feeling something extremely complicated about that for the rest of the morning. Armando sent a message on day 19. Not in person. He wasn't the kind of person who showed up himself when he could send someone else. He sent a sealed note and 2 men who left before anyone could stop them. And the note said, "Return what is mine or I come myself." I read it over Ronald's shoulder. Then I took a slow breath and said, "He'll do it. He doesn't make threats he doesn't mean." "Then we finish this before he gets the chance," Wilson said. "You said you were already building something against him," I said, looking between them. "Before you found me. What was it?" A pause. The 3 of them exchanged a look. "We've been collecting evidence," Ronald said, "on everything Armando has done, not just to us. There are others he's hurt, other families, other territories. We've been building a case to take to the High Council. If we can get it to them, he loses his standing, his protection, everything." "How close are you?" I asked. "Close," Keegan said. "But there's one piece we've been missing. A specific record of what he's been doing in that basement, what he was doing with you. That document exists. We know it does. Jameer was supposed to be getting us access to it." "Jameer." I looked at Keegan. Keegan looked back at me. "He's not going to get it for us," I said. "No," Keegan said. "I don't think he is. We didn't tell the others yet. What I knew about Jameer was still just a feeling, strong, specific, deeply rooted, but not proof." Keegan and I worked on it quietly over the next 2 days, retracing every piece of information that had reached Armando in the past weeks. Every detail that felt too convenient, too precise. By day 21, we had enough to know. And by then, it was almost too late. Jameer came back on day 22. He came with 3 men from Armando's network that the triplets didn't recognize, and he came while Ronald was out and Wilson was in the back of the house. He came through the front door because he still had a key. I was in the main room with Keegan when the door opened. Jameer looked at me across the room. The smile was the same as the first time, wide, empty. "We're going to take a little trip," he said. Kylan stepped between us. He was wolfless. He had no wolf form, no enhanced strength, none of the physical gifts that most alphas had. What he had was height, stillness, and the particular look of someone who had already made peace with whatever was about to happen. "Get out of my house," Kylan said. "Kylan, get out." What happened next was fast. Jameer's men moved. Kylan fought, genuinely fought, which surprised Jameer's men enough to slow them down, and I grabbed the nearest thing that could be thrown, which was a lamp, and I threw it because my legs might have been weak but my arms were fine. The lamp hit one of the men in the shoulder hard enough to make him stumble, and in the chaos that followed, Wilson came barreling through from the back of the house, and the whole thing descended into noise and motion. Jameer went for me directly. He grabbed my arm and said, very close, "You're going to come quietly, or this gets worse for everyone." I looked at him. I thought of 3 years in a basement. I thought of 11 seconds on for seconds off. I thought of Ronald saying, "Your voice sounds exactly like I thought it would." "No," I said. Then I bit him on the hand, which was honestly not my most dignified moment, but it worked. By the time Ronald came through the door, he'd heard the noise from 2 streets over and run the whole way. It was mostly over. Jameer's men were gone. Jameer himself was pinned to the wall by Wilson, who was breathing hard and bleeding from his lip and looked furious in a very specific way that I had not seen from him before. "The document," Ronald said immediately, looking at Jameer. "Where is it?" Jameer said nothing. "Jameer," Kylan said, from the other side of the room very quietly. "I know you've been feeding information to Armando since before we met you. I know you sent him our location. I know you've been planning this for weeks." He paused. "I also know that you're in a room with 3 people who have every reason to be angry at you, and 1 person who has even more reason than that." He looked at me briefly. "Help us, or face whatever comes next on your own." Jameer looked at the 3 of them. Then he looked at me. He told us where the document was. Getting the document took 2 more days and a plan that Wilson came up with at 2 in the morning on a piece of notebook paper that still had my fruit list on the back. It was a good plan. A genuinely good plan. I helped refine it because I knew Armando's stronghold better than any of them. Where the blind spots were, where the guards switched, where things were kept. We didn't go in together. That was the key. Kylan and I stayed back. Wilson and Ronald went in with 2 other people they trusted. Not Jameer, never Jameer again, but 2 others from their network who had never been compromised. They were in and out in 40 minutes. The document was a full account. 3 years of records. Every person Armando had brought to the basement, every illness I had absorbed, every time the guards had logged what was done and why, because Armando kept records of everything like it was a business, because to him it was all there. My name, my real name, Kylan, appeared on almost every page. Reading it was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Kylan sat beside me while I did it and didn't say anything, just stayed there, steady and present, and when I got to the middle pages and my hands started shaking again, he just put his hand near mine on the table. Not on mine. Near. Available. I looked at it for a moment. Then I put my hand on top of his. He didn't make it into anything. He just turned his hand over so I wasn't resting on the back of it, and we stayed like that while I finished reading. The case went to the High Council 10 days later. We sent it through 3 separate channels because Wilson was not taking any chances. The council received it, began reviewing it. The process was slow and bureaucratic and maddening, and Wilson paced the house so much in those weeks that he wore a path in the rug. But then, Armando didn't wait for the council. He had been planning something long before we ever submitted the case, and we didn't know, we couldn't have known, what he had already put in motion. The 3 of them started getting sick on the same day. It began with Ronald. A headache so bad he had to hold the wall to walk. Then Wilson's hands started trembling, which was the kind of thing that would have been frightening from anyone but from someone who moved the way Wilson moved. Always certain, always precise. It was deeply wrong. Kylan ran a slight fever by the afternoon and didn't say anything about it until I noticed his eyes were glassy and grabbed his arm in the hallway. When did this start? I asked. He hesitated. This morning. Same time as the others. Same time. All three. Together. Something cold moved through me that had nothing to do with my gift. What did you eat? What did you drink? Think. Was there anything that Jameer could have? The tea, Wilson said from the couch. He'd gone pale. Jameer brought tea 4 days ago. We thought it was a gesture. Ronald made it yesterday morning. Ronald was looking at his hands. I thought we'd cleared the house. I thought we'd gone through everything. This was not a regular illness. I could already feel it from across the room. A faint pull, like something reaching toward me, the way sickness always called to my gift. But this was different from anything I'd felt before. Deeper. More intentional. This had been made, not caught. Armando had sent something designed. Terminal, I understood without anyone having to say it. This thing was designed to end. I sat down on the coffee table, the same spot Kylan used to sit, and looked at the three of them. My three, because somewhere in the past weeks they had become mine in a way I had no better word for. Not owned, not owed. Just mine. The way a home is yours even when your name isn't on any document. I can take it, I said. No, all three of them said. Together. Without hesitation. It would have been funny under different circumstances. Kylan, Ronald started. I know what you're going to say, I said. And I know what this looks like. But it's not the same. It's exactly the same, Wilson said. Him using you, that's exactly what he wants. He made us sick to force you to use your gift. If you do it now, you're doing what Armando designed this whole thing to make you do. I looked at him. His hands were still shaking, but his eyes were sharp. Furious. Not at me. He's right, Kylan said quietly. He was sitting against the wall now. He'd slid down to the floor at some point, and seeing Kylan on the floor instead of steady and upright was somehow the thing that made it most real. If you take this in, it could kill you. He designed it to be absorbed. He designed it for you specifically. I know that, I said. Then. I know that, I said again. And I'm telling you not as his resource, not because anyone is making me. I'm telling you that I want to, because it's my choice. It's always been my choice. He took that from me. You gave it back. I looked at each of them in turn. This is me using it. Mine. The room was very quiet. Kylan looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, If anything goes wrong, then it goes wrong, I said. But it won't. I didn't actually know that. I was lying a little. The thing I could feel from across the room was enormous and dark, and it had been built by someone who knew exactly what I was and exactly how to hurt it. But I had been carrying impossible things since I was 18 years old, and something in me, that stubborn, stupid, unkillable thing, said not today. I started with Ronald because his was the furthest along. He let me take his hands. He looked at me the whole time, this steady, careful look, and said, If this hurts you, shoo, I said. It hit me like running into a wall made of fire specifically. My gift caught it and started burning it down, and the pain it was a lot. I won't dress it up as anything else. It was a lot. I held on. Ronald's breathing eased almost immediately. The lines around his eyes smoothed out. He squeezed my hands without meaning to, probably a reflex, and said my name, just Kylan, like he was checking I was still there. Still here, I said. Wilson was next. He tried to argue again right up until I looked at him with whatever expression my face was making, because he stopped mid-sentence and went quiet. His was different from Ronald's. The designed illness had gotten into something in his hands and arms specifically, and taking it felt like pulling thread out of something complicated and delicate. I worked carefully. I took my time. When it was done, he grabbed my wrist. Immediately let go. Immediately apologized, and I said, Wilson, it's fine, for the second time in our acquaintance, and meant it just as much. Kylan was last. He was on the floor, and I sat down on the floor with him. His fever was bad by now. His forehead was damp and his eyes were doing something unfocused that I didn't like. I took both his hands in mine and he looked at me from under that fever glow like he was trying to say something but couldn't get to it. "I've got you," I said, which was the exact thing Ronald had said carrying me up those stairs. And I hadn't planned to say it, it just came out, and something moved across Keegan's face that I felt all the way down in my chest. The thing that came out of him was the worst of the three. Whatever Armando had made had settled in deepest in Keegan, and pulling it was like, I don't have a better word than drowning. I was burning and drowning at the same time, and for about 30 seconds, I wasn't entirely sure which direction was up. But I held on. I held on because Keegan was still looking at me. Even through the fever, even through whatever he was feeling, he was looking at me. Not with fear, not with desperation, but with something that was just trust. Pure and specific and aimed right at me. I was not going to let that down. The illness broke. I felt it go. Felt the moment my body caught the last of it and began the slow, burning process of dissolving it into nothing. I would be sick for a day, maybe two. I knew this, but it was already fading. My body knew this work. Keegan's fever dropped so fast he shuddered. His eyes cleared. He looked at me. Really looked, fully present again and said, "You're shaking." "I know," I said. "You need to lie down." "I know," I said again. "Then why are you still?" "Because," I said, "I wanted to stay here for a minute." He was quiet. Then he shifted, carefully, and put his arm around me. Not grabbing, just there, steady, present. I leaned against his shoulder and closed my eyes. The shaking was starting to slow. My body was doing its work. "Thank you," he said, quietly enough that it was only for me. "Thank you," I said back. I didn't explain what I meant by it. I didn't have to. Armando was brought before the High Council 6 weeks later. The document was admitted. The witnesses, there were others, it turned out, others who had been waiting for exactly this kind of case, came forward. His standing was stripped. His territory dissolved. His network scattered. I wasn't there for the verdict. I didn't need to be. Ronald told me about it when he got home, sitting across the kitchen table, and his voice was careful and even, the way it always was, except for the slight looseness around his eyes that meant he was more relieved than he was letting on. "It's done," he said. I looked at him. Then I looked out the window, the real window with real light coming through it, in a house where the keys were mine and the door locked from the inside and nobody was coming down the stairs. "Yeah," I said. "It is." Wilson made a terrible dinner that night to celebrate, and we all ate it anyway, and I laughed for the first time. Really laughed, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and surprised. When Wilson burned the toast so badly that Keegan quietly opened a window without saying a word. And Wilson caught me laughing and looked so delighted by it that he almost burned the second round too. My legs still got tired sometimes. My voice still went rough when I talked a lot. Some nights the dark felt close in a way that had nothing to do with the actual dark, and I would lie there and breathe through it until it passed. But in the mornings there was light. In the mornings Keegan knocked before coming in, and Ronald had the right bread, and Wilson was too loud in the kitchen, and I was home. For the first time, really, truly, I was home. I thought it was all well until it started with a scent that didn't belong. Not a bad scent, exactly, that was the problem. It was warm and sweet and deliberately, carefully constructed, the kind of thing that didn't happen by accident. I noticed it first on a Thursday afternoon when a woman named Madison came to the house under the pretense of offering an alliance. She was an alpha, powerful in the way that announced itself before she even spoke. Something in the way the air shifted when she walked through the door, something old and deliberate. She had the kind of presence that made rooms rearrange themselves around her, and she walked in like she already knew they would. I didn't like her immediately. That wasn't fair of me, probably. But I had spent 3 years learning that instincts existed for a reason, and mine were loud. She sat across from the three of them at the table and smiled the whole time. A different smile from Jameer's, warmer, more careful, the kind of smile that had been practiced until it looked effortless. She talked about territory, about the gap Armando's fall had left, about opportunities and shared interests. She looked at Ronald the most, then Wilson, then Keegan. Then she looked at me just once, briefly, and then she didn't look at me again, which was its own kind of message. She left after an hour and didn't push for an answer. That was deliberate too. Give them time to think about it. Give the scent time to settle into the walls. Because she had left the scent behind on purpose. I understood this by the next morning. Ronald was distracted over breakfast in a way I'd never seen from him before. He read the same page of his notes 3 times without turning it. Wilson kept going quiet in the middle of sentences, which for Wilson was genuinely alarming, like watching a river stop moving. Keegan was the worst. He was still present, still himself, but there was something slightly off in his eyes, like someone had adjusted the focus just a fraction and he hadn't noticed. I noticed. She did something, I said at breakfast, and all 3 of them looked at me. Madison, Wilson said. She's interesting. She had good points about the Northern Territory. Wilson, I said, you hate territory politics. You said 3 weeks ago that you'd rather eat Keegan's cooking than sit through another territory meeting. Wilson opened his mouth, closed it. I did say that. Whatever she left in this house, I said. It's working on you. All 3 of you. A silence. Ronald set down his notes. He looked at them. Really looked, the careful, deliberate look he used when he was being honest with himself about something he'd been avoiding. I thought about her last night, he said slowly. Which was, I don't usually think about someone I've met once. I had a dream, Keegan said. Flat, matter of fact, like it bothered him more than he was expressing. Same, Wilson admitted. I looked at the 3 of them. Then I said, I need to air out the house. All the windows, all the doors, everything open for an hour. And none of you leave until it clears. Wilson started to argue. Ronald put a hand on his arm. He's right, Ronald said. He's right, and you know he's right. I opened everything. Every window, every door. The cold morning air came through in a rush and I walked every room deliberately, moving it through, and by the time I came back to the kitchen, the smell was mostly gone. Faint traces here and there, but fading. Madison came back the next day. She stood in the doorway and looked at me in a way that was the opposite of surprised. You cleared it, she said, almost admiringly. You should leave, I said. I haven't done anything wrong, she said. Pheromone influence isn't illegal. It's not even unusual for an alpha of my. I know what you were doing, I said. And so do they. She looked past me at the 3 of them, who were standing in a loose line behind me. Not aggressive, not posturing, just there, just present, just clearly and specifically on the same side of the room as me. Something shifted in her expression. Something genuinely calculating. The last bound Omega, she said softly, like she was placing a piece. You're the reason the influence didn't hold. No, I said. I'm not. They held it themselves. She looked at Ronald. You were thinking about me last night. Briefly, Ronald said. And then I thought about why I was thinking about you, and that was much more interesting. She looked at Wilson. You dreamed about someone using pheromones to manipulate 3 people who trust each other, Wilson said pleasantly. Real illuminating dream, actually. Very educational. She looked at Keegan last. Keegan looked back at her with the particular stillness that meant he'd already had this conversation in his head and knew exactly how it ended. Leave, he simply said. She did. She paused at the door, turned back once, looked at me with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite respect. Something in between, something unresolved, and then she was gone. The door closed. The 4 of us stood in the quiet of the house for a moment. Then Wilson said, Okay, but she was genuinely interesting before we figured out the pheromone thing, right? Like, objectively? Wilson, Ronald said tiredly. I'm just saying. No, Keegan said. and then looked at me with the faintest pull at the corner of his mouth. And Kylan, thank you for noticing. I looked at the door, then at the three of them. You would have figured it out, I said. Maybe, Ronald said, but you figured it out faster. He paused. You always do. I didn't say anything to that. But the stubborn thing in my chest, the one that had kept beating through 3 years of dark and cold and 11 seconds on, for seconds off, it did something warm and quiet and entirely its own. And I let it. If this story did something in you, drop a comment down below. I read every single one, and I genuinely want to know which part hit hardest for you. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories like this, because we're just getting started. And share this one with someone who needs to believe in found family today.